Living in Belgium, married to a Portuguese man, and being Hungarian myself, I speak 4 languages, 3 fluently, and no, I'm not a genius. And today I'm going to show you how language learning can actually be really fun, and it's time to ditch textbooks. Hi, my name is Dinka Salvador. Welcome back to my channel. If you're struggling with learning a new language, this is for you. I hate when people say like, oh, Dinka, but you have a thing for languages, you have a talent or something. No, that's absolutely not true. I have a 560 days of streak in Portuguese. So that's how much talent I have. I just kind of force myself to sit down and actually learn it. 560 days learning Portuguese. So there's no magic pill, there's no trick, or it's not like you put your language textbook under your pillow and you wake up the next day being fluent in a certain language. You just kind of have to do it. So you can imagine my autocorrect is utterly confused. I make appointments in Dutch, and then most of my work meetings are in English, and then I call my mom in Hungarian, and I listen to Portuguese at home just by music or listening to my husband talking to his family. And because of this, we kind of created our own lingo. So it's like, for outsiders, it sounds probably very confusing. But I find it really interesting how the brain works also. Like, certain things happen to you in a certain language and you kind of remember it in that language. Like, for example, when I talk to my mom, everything that happens to me here in Belgium happens to me either in Dutch or in English. Oftentimes I find myself translating the things to Hungarian. But I think it's really a fun way to keep your brain fit, and it opens up so many new experiences and opportunities. Magyar az én szép anyanyelvem, mindig azt szoktam mondani, hogy ez a szupererőm, mondjuk annyira nem hasznos. A magyar egy elszigetelt nyelv, általában a finnekkel tesznek minket össze, de szerintem csak azért, mert mind a kettő nagyon furcsán hangzik, meg ugye semmi köze nincs egyéb európai nyelvekhez. Elég vicces, amikor például édesanyámmal valahol külföldön magyarul beszélünk, mindig megkérdezik, hogy milyen nyelven beszélünk, mert hogy nem ismerik fel. English became my primary language. I think in English, I dream in English. I still curse in Hungarian though, and sometimes in Portuguese. You know, when you kind of like stab your pinky toe, and it's this visceral emotion that just emerges that still comes to me in my mother tongue. And counting. If I need to count something really quickly, that's still in Hungarian. But English is basically 80%. Ik heb Nederlands geleerd toen ik naar België verhuisde. Het is zeker geen gemakkelijke taal. Vooral alle verschillende dialecten maken het erg moeilijk voor anderstaligen. Ik herinner me nog hoe fier ik was. Ik woonde toen al 10 jaar in Gent. En iemand heeft me gezegd dat ik een Gent-accent had. En ik weet niet hoe fier. Ik heb een accent in het Nederlands. Er worden ook veel Franse woorden gebruikt. Ze zeggen dat het dialect is, maar het is gewoon Frans. Bijvoorbeeld chauffage wordt gebruikt. Dat betekent kachel eigenlijk. Maar iedereen zegt chauffage. En ze zeggen dat het dialect is, maar het is gewoon Frans. Português é a minha nova paixão. O som é tão bonito, j. Naquela altura não sabia que um dia ia casar com um português. Agora o português faz parte do meu dia a dia. O mais fácil foi perceber a língua no início. Os portugueses comem muitas palavras, especialmente o meu marido. Sim, tu amor, obrigada por seres um bom professor. Adoro aprender calão e palavrões. Esta língua é muito rica nisso, ao contrário do holandês, onde só tem godverdomme. O brasileiro é muito diferente do português europeu. Gosto mais do português europeu porque o brasileiro é mais aberto e, para mim, perde aquela sensualidade que eu adoro. Traditional language learning methods don't really transfer to everyday life. So, for example, everybody knows that one language learning app, and I started learning Portuguese with that one. And then I ended up repeating sentences like, the tiger drinks milk. And I was like, I'm never going to use this. And so I find making language learning a fun experience for yourself and kind of like personalizing it helps a lot to keep up with it, because if it's always like learning phrases that you're never going to use, you will not have much success. Like the one time when you have a situation where you can kind of practice your target language and you only know the tiger drinks milk, that's not going to get you very far. I think it's very important also that you kind of be okay with making an idiot out of yourself sometimes. I remember when I was still learning Dutch and I was at the restaurant and I wanted to order sparkling water. So sparkling water is spuitwater in Nederlands, in Dutch. But I ended up ordering spruitwater, which is like the Brussels sprouts, so sprout water. And then the lady looked at me like, what? And then, of course, I understood I made a mistake and I corrected myself. But now I will never forget how to say spuitwater, because I made that funny, stupid mistake. And it helped me to remember the correct way of saying it. I find that being kind of overwhelmed with grammar and vocabulary, or like focusing too much on grammar and vocabulary, is really pointless. It's a very outdated way of learning languages. I don't have any textbooks or don't use any textbooks anymore. What works really well for me is using AI. I think we have to take advantage of all the technology that is around us. I'm not going to get into the whole AI discussion. I think it's still a tool. You can use it for good or bad, and I prefer to use it to my advantage. So I like to use AI to create certain vocabulary lists specific to my needs, or just kind of create like a conversational exercise so that I can practice. But I have an app for European Portuguese. It's specific to that one language, nothing else. I find that sometimes tools that are only for one specific language can be much more helpful than tools that are for multiple languages, because each language has that kind of difficulty that is specific to that one language. I find for me, tools that are made in only that one specific language are usually much better, because they really get into the nitty gritty and in the detail of that specific language. I've heard it so many times, like, oh, I'm too old, or I don't have a talent for languages. I really don't like that excuse. If you can speak your own language, you can learn another one. This is my view, because it's the exact same thing. When you were just a baby, you wanted to be understood. You wanted to communicate. That was your motivation, which was a really big one. So it's not about not having the talent. It's about not having the motivation. Basically, what I'm saying is that you just have to find a better way, a better motivation for yourself to want to learn a certain language. So what are the common frustrations? For example, I've been studying a language for years, but I still can't have a conversation. Yeah, I mean, you have to put yourself in certain situations where you need to have conversations. And I know it's uncomfortable. I still feel not so comfortable in my Portuguese. That's my weakest language of the four. And you know, I make mistakes all the time. I actually practiced the most last summer. My husband's mom stayed with us for a couple of months, and she doesn't speak any other language, just Portuguese. So that made me really get out of my comfort zone, and I had to use everything. It was a bit like Pictionary style sometimes, but she started to understand me more and more as we practiced, for 2 months every single day. That's pretty intense. And at a certain point, I also asked her to give me feedback. If I say something wrong, correct me so that I know it for the next time. And I think there's no better teacher than a native speaker that can correct you and help you to learn the language the right way. And maybe you don't have access to a native speaker like that, but there are so many tools out there. There are a lot of language exchange platforms, or you can just reach out to someone in the community in your target language. I find that usually people are very helpful. They are almost flattered when you want to learn their language. I think you can always find ways to find someone to practice with. Actually, this was a bit of an issue when I moved to Belgium and I started learning Dutch and getting better at it, because here on the Flemish part where I live, everybody speaks English. And of course, they immediately heard that I had an accent in Dutch. So immediately switch to English. So I really had to like force it to practice Dutch because they just love speaking in English. So it was actually kind of funny. And then there's the plateau effect when you kind of feel like you're an intermediate level, but then you just kind of feel stuck and you feel like you're not making any progress. This is an annoying part, but the secret is just to kind of sticking with it and just practicing it every single day. Eventually it will kind of boost your language skills, and then all of a sudden you will feel like so much more comfortable understanding and speaking the language. My advice is just kind of stick with it and don't give up, even if you don't feel like the daily improvement, because your brain is still getting used to the language, and the more you practice, the more you immerse yourself in the language, the easier it gets. I try not to translate things in my head when I'm learning a new language. And this is difficult, especially at the beginning, because, for example, I learned Dutch in English and I learned Portuguese in English as well. So it gets kind of a bit weird sometimes. My advice is really to start making sentences from scratch in the target language instead of translating it from a language that you're comfortable with, because sometimes the grammatic structure is just completely different. It doesn't serve the purpose. In order for you to understand how that new language works, you have to start to think in that new language. And maybe, in the beginning you will be very limited, because that's also something that I find very annoying, that you cannot express yourself to the same extent in a new language that you can in your mother tongue, for example. But this also helps you to simplify your thoughts. Just stick to things that you know. Don't start with big fancy words and complex grammatical structures. And once you get comfortable with that, then you will be able to fine tune it and apply fancier constructs. I would prescribe this to anyone. Just go live abroad if you can. Just experience living abroad, because it will not only be helpful for the language, it's like total immersion, but I always say that it's a completely transformative experience. I've learned so much about myself, about the culture, and also about what I miss from my culture. I appreciate Hungarian food so much more that I live here in Belgium, and it kind of shows you where your roots are. It's kind of weird, like you have to go abroad to experience this, but I always say that I would prescribe this to everyone. Live at least 1 year somewhere where you don't speak the language, and just try to immerse yourself as much as possible, because it's such a transformative experience. I moved to Belgium without speaking any Dutch at all. As I said, in the Flemish side where I live, a lot of people speak English, but even then, after a while, when they know that you live here, it's kind of expected of you to learn Dutch. And I signed up for the classes like straight up, and there was like a couple of months waiting list, and I started learning, I think, 3 months after I got here. And it took a long time, and it was very challenging, and I had to go to classes every weekday. It was tough next to like working and everything, but I'm so grateful that I had that experience, because I was also received in a very different way when I started speaking Dutch to people around me, because they also know that their language is not simple. But because of that, they also appreciate it a lot when you start learning it. So Portuguese, I started learning through my relationship. I went to Lisbon in 2017, and I completely fell in love with the country and with the language and the people, and just the lifestyle. Little did I know then that I will be married to a Portuguese man, so that was kind of funny. But now, of course, I hear it every single day, and it helps a lot, because you just get used to how things sound. Because Portuguese, especially European Portuguese, they love swallowing words. Especially my dear husband is an expert in this. So it was really handy to have someone like a native speaker talking every single day to kind of decode it, because it sounded very different from how I would pronounce it. And yeah, now we have a multilingual household, which is just really funny. Like you start the sentence in English and then there's like Portuguese and Dutch words sprinkled in it. Sometimes our friends say that we should be a Netflix show because it's pretty entertaining, but we definitely developed our own lingo. So what are the real strategies that have worked for me? Immersion, for sure. Try to consume content in the target language. For example, YouTube videos or even Netflix series. For Portuguese, we watched this really cool series, Rabo do Peixe, with English subtitles. It's not only good for the language, but it's also the cultural aspect of it. I remember there was this one scene in the series where the guy was like unsure if he's going to come in or not, and then the other character called him quarta-feira, which means Wednesday. It's like Wednesday is the middle of the week, so when you're undecided, you're not inside, you're not outside. So it was kind of funny. I found it really interesting to learn about the language, like understanding it through the sense of humor that they use. And also music. I asked my Portuguese friends and family to send me their favorite Portuguese artists because I love music so much. It's kind of like constantly ingraining the language into your brain. And it's so fun the way I start to understand more and more. It's like I kind of know the lyrics of many songs that I enjoy, but then when I actually start to understand, oh, that's what they are saying, it's a pretty cool experience. And just try making friends with people like locals who have the patience also to teach you. Like, for example, for me, my mother in law is a very good teacher, also because of the fact that there is no other option. She only speaks Portuguese, but she's also very patient with me. I have a couple of other friends here in Belgium as well who are really willing to stick to Dutch. That helps because it's also something that you have to practice every single day, right? Like, I feel like I'm kind of losing Hungarian because I don't use it every day. And sometimes I really have to think about words, after almost 14 years of living abroad. I really sometimes struggle, like, I don't use these words anymore. You need to practice, right? And then just consistency. I find that practicing every single day, even if it's just for 5 minutes, gets you really, really far. Like, for example, with Portuguese, I love it. I enjoy learning Portuguese. So it's not a chore for me. I do it willingly and gladly every single day. But I don't do it for half an hour every day. Sometimes it's really just 5 minutes, just reviewing my words. But it keeps it in the forefront of your mind. And to me, it's much more effective to do like 5 to 10 minutes every day than to do like 2 hours every once in a while. What I also like to do is write notes in the target language, like shopping list or just little to-do list or things that you have to look at often. And chances are that those are also things that you come across often, like, groceries or like things to do. So it's also kind of a useful way to learn things that are relevant to you. And of course, you have to accept that you are going to make mistakes. This is a journey. So, just be kind to yourself. Like, think about yourself as a child who's learning to speak. How adorable it is when they kind of make up words or mispronounce them. So just think of yourself in the same way. Like, be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. I always say, like, for example, with Hungarian, my language is so difficult. I say that half the population doesn't speak it properly. So it would be crazy to expect a foreigner to nail it. And that goes to any language, I think English, a lot of people think that English is a simple language. I don't think it is, maybe to a certain extent, because we are surrounded by it so much. We hear it everywhere. It makes it easier. But there are pretty difficult grammatical concepts also in English. So just have grace with yourself, be kind to yourself. It's not about being perfect, it's about being able to communicate. I find that learning through like daily activities, as I said, with the shopping list or small talk, when you are heading out to do a certain chore or errand, ask AI to design a real life conversation just for you to learn words that could come up. Like, for example, for me, I love to cook, and so does my mother-in-law. So for us, learning Portuguese happened a lot in the kitchen. I now know a lot of words. I don't even know them in English, like all kinds of fish and different names of sea creatures, because I was interested in it. It was a fun way for me to learn, and I wanted to be able to cook with my mother-in-law. I wanted to understand how she's making that certain dish, or what is the recipe. So find things that are exciting for you and put yourself in those situations and focus on those words, because it will inevitably also allow you to learn other words that you just need, like the basic building blocks of the language. But it will be much easier and much more fun if you are doing an activity that you already enjoy. This is again like sort of a mindset shift situation. I would focus on communication over perfection. Just try to create an environment at home. Like, for example, at a certain point when I was learning Dutch, I put post-its on everything. So I wrote door on the door in Dutch, and window and whatever, because it's something that is very simple, and just by seeing it every single day, your brain is already absorbing that information. Or for example, with the music, listen to music in your target language. If you're a little bit more comfortable already in the language, set your phone or your car's language to the target language. I wouldn't do this on day one with like Japanese, for example, but your phone and your car are objects that you are using every single day. You know the functionality, you already know the menu enough that even if you don't understand the word, you kind of can guess what it means. And by just using it every single day, you're learning so much. And this also, it doesn't cost anything. I really like to use all kinds of technology, so like apps and podcasts and YouTube videos, and especially AI. I think AI is an amazing tool. I usually ask AI to give me specific words about a certain topic, or even like design little conversations, like kind of situation games. And it's much more fun when you also have like a specific lesson designed for your needs than to go through a boring textbook. I mean, I only learned English from a textbook and never ever, like, it's super uninspiring. And I learned much more by watching Melrose Place or like Dirty Dancing in original English without subtitles than from any of those textbooks. So, and also set realistic goals for yourself. As I said, like 5 minutes daily is much better than 2 hours every once in a while. And maybe use a habit tracker, or some apps even have like a built-in streak counter that can also be very motivating. Like, just kind of make it into a game. And also, don't beat yourself up if you miss one day. Like, you can start all over. It's not the end of the world. And also embrace the cultural aspects of the language that you're learning. Learn about the food and the music and all kinds of habits and things that are related to that language. I find that also kind of boosts your language learning experience. Make it fun and relevant to your interests. I love to cook, so for me, probably the majority of the words that I know in Portuguese are definitely around cooking and food. But it's okay, because this will also teach me other words. Otherwise, I cannot express myself properly, in the kitchen. So just find situations that are fun for you, and just go start with that, and don't start with memorizing a whole vocabulary, because yeah, it's just our brain isn't wired that way. And I also must say that in my experience, the more languages you speak, the easier it gets, because you learn to learn. You start to have a system, you start to understand how your brain works. And for me now, learning Portuguese is so much easier than when I first learned English back in high school, because I already know what are the building blocks that I definitely need. It's like you have the must haves and the nice to have. And it's actually kind of funny that I already understand a worrying amount of German and Spanish because of my Dutch and my Portuguese. So the more languages you speak, the world is just kind of becomes more available to you. And I really love that feeling when you speak to people in their own language. It's such a different experience. So just remember that language learning is really a journey. It's not a destination, and consistency beats intensity. I really like to use a habit tracker, or I have a built-in functionality of that in the app where I'm learning Portuguese. And real life practice is just so much better than textbooks. Mistakes are your best teachers. As much as it's uncomfortable at the moment, those are the moments that you are going to remember, and you will never make that same mistake again, because you remember how awkward it felt. remember the Brussels sprouts water that I ordered. And I actually learned Dutch when I was 28, and I started learning Portuguese at 36. So it's never too late. And I am still planning on learning many other languages after Portuguese. So I feel that motivation is really key, and consistency as well. But don't let anyone tell you that you don't have a talent for languages. I think there is no such thing, or at least if there is, it's like highly overrated. Slow and steady, like that really wins the game. If you like this video, please subscribe, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. Please share your language learning journey in the comments below, and I will see you on the next